Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. I am your host, Dr. Harbir Sayan. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here, guys. I'm so excited to be back. 2024, rocking it here. We're on a roll with our episodes. We got great guests lined up, and today is no exception. Today's a great one because I have somebody who's from outside of eye care who's really going to be able to give us so much insight into being a CEO, building a business, the challenges that come with building a business in a totally different industry. Today, I have Mr. Andrew Burke, who is the CEO of Bluberi Gaming. And Bluberi Gaming makes slot machines for casinos all across North America. And he is the youngest CEO in this industry. So he's going to share a lot of insights into how he got to where he is, what he's had to go through, the struggles, the challenges, COVID, how it's affected the business, all of this kind of stuff. And of course, he's going to also share his values. This is one of the key things I really want to get to at some point during the conversation is the core values that Andrew developed at Bluberi that's really helped them succeed. So thank you, Andrew, for joining me here on the podcast. I appreciate you having you, man.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great. So let's put a little bit of context on the conversation. We actually met a couple months back at Vision Expo West in Las Vegas,
Yep.
and I interviewed you there, which was a really great opportunity. I was so glad to have done that, and we got to know each other. I got to learn a lot about you, and I just thought you'd be such a perfect guest for the podcast, just given everything you were sharing at that meeting. But why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself, Andrew? Tell us where you're from and what you do, how you got to where you are now.
For sure. I think thanks again for having me, Harbir. I really enjoyed our conversation in Vegas, so glad to expand upon it today. I started my career in the private equity industry, actually, and so I grew up in Ohio and then moved to San Francisco in like 2006. And moving to San Francisco from Ohio is a little bit like moving to Mars. It was just a complete culture shock for a kid from
I
Ohio
get that.
to move there. And work downtown, live downtown, just, total change in my life for the better in many, many ways. And I started working at this private equity firm called Alpine Investors. And before I kind of talk about my career, one thing I would say is that one of the things I've learned now today is that a lot of young people, and I was no exception to this, focus on their titles. They focus on the amount of money they're making in the early days, but really what you should be focused on is like the skills you're developing and the kind of scope of your work. And what I didn't realize by going to Alpine was like I was just being given this amazing gift to have a tremendous amount of skill development in the kind of 5 years that I was there, and to be giving a scope of responsibility way beyond where I should have had for a kid, sort of my age and skill level. But the private equity firm was investing money in a ton of different companies, and one of the companies they invested in was a slot machine business in Las Vegas called American Gaming Systems. It's now called AGS. And when the stock market blew up in kind of 2008, we stopped investing in new investments and really started to kind of entrench in the companies that we owned. And so I went to work pretty much full time on AGS around that time. And again, focus on like responsibilities. Like I was given a ton of responsibility to open new markets and work on business development. I worked on marketing. I got to work on kind of all facets of the business. And in 2011, the CEO of AGS basically said to me, he said, "Hey, you either want to keep being a private equity guy or you want to be an operator. And if you want to be an operator, you got to move to Las Vegas, leave, the private equity firm officially and come work for us." And so I did that and moved to Las Vegas in kind of early 2011. And from there, AGS eventually sold to a company called Apollo, which is one of the largest private equity firms in the world. And I stayed and ran the slot division. So AGS eventually had slot machines, table games, and online gaming or interactive games. And I was the general manager of the slot business. We went on a very successful run and grew the company from kind of, call it, 50 million of revenue to 356 million of revenue, and like 100 employees to 800 employees. And we eventually took the company public on the New York Stock Exchange in early 2018 at over $1 billion valuation.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing run, and I learned a ton. Talking about responsibility and scope, like just doing a lot of stuff I'd never done before. And then we spent time being a publicly traded company, which is not my favorite thing in the world, probably.
Right.
There's a lot of differences about running a public business versus a private one. And in late 2019, another private equity firm called me and said, "Hey, we have a company called Bluberi, which is another slot machine company that's based in Quebec that needs a CEO." And so I went to work for them in actually January of 2020, actually January 13th. So pretty close to today's date,
Wow. Almost your
2020.
anniversary.
Yeah, yeah, almost. And so right before COVID, I had no idea that COVID was coming as kind of a
Right.
first time CEO. And so, yeah, I'm sure we can talk about that during this call, but I've been here 4 years and the business has drastically changed. We've had a pretty significant turnaround from, my first year there, we were kind of doing about 10 million in revenue. This past year, we did 75 million in revenue.
Wow.
So,
That's incredible.
pretty significant growth again. So,
Yeah.
um, and I think more importantly, and finish up my long-winded intro, I'm a father and a husband. I have two daughters who are 9 and 6 years old, and my wife and I have actually been together since high school and moved
That's
to San
amazing.
Francisco and Las Vegas together. So family's a really important part of who I am and my journey as well.
I love that, man. That was not a long-winded intro. That was actually really great. I feel like you hit all the highlights real quick. And I forgot to mention off the top that yes, you're a dad. You're a girl dad,
That's right.
like myself, and so that's always a
Certified.
nice little connection. But I also love the Canadian connection that you're now the CEO of a company that was founded in Canada,
Yeah.
and has offices in Quebec, in New Brunswick. So that's really cool. So do you come up to Canada much?
Yeah, I'm up there at least once a quarter, and the company that owns us, the private equity firm, is based out of Toronto.
Oh
So,
yeah, right.
I've spent some time in Toronto now. I've spent a lot of time in Montreal, and our office is actually in a town called Drummondville, which is like sort of halfway between sort of Montreal and Quebec City. And then we just opened an office in New Brunswick, like 4 or 5 months ago. So I haven't been there yet, but looking forward to my first trip. But I'm spending a lot of time in Canada. I love it up there, actually.
That's
So it's
awesome.
yeah,
That's really great. So have you learned French?
no, my French is very bad. I like to say that, I grew up very close to Kentucky, so my English is also very bad. So
I love that.
I can barely speak English, but I'm learning, I'm picking up. But Quebecois French is very fast.
Yeah.
That is for
Yeah, yeah.
sure.
There and it's like a lot of slang and stuff like that, right?
Ton of
So
slang.
there's ways that they'll say something, but they won't actually say the word that
Yeah,
you think it happens. Everybody's got their own little dialect
yeah.
and
I
their own
definitely
way.
do find myself sitting in meetings where everyone will switch to French, and I can follow along. Like I know what's going on, like because I can understand the context, but I'm horrendous at speaking it. So
It's okay. Hey, I've lived in Canada for 30 years. My French is terrible, so
yeah,
don't feel so bad.
yeah, okay. I'll be let
Um
off the hook there.
So that title or that, actually, let me go back to something you said there now that using the
Yeah,
word
yeah,
title. I think there's a really, really, really important message that you just shared in there that's so relevant for us in eye care right now. And that is that you said, a lot of times younger business people, entrepreneurs, whoever it might be, professionals get caught up in the title or the acknowledgement or making the money right out the gate.
yeah,
But you were luckily in a position where you got to work on your skill set first and then applied that skill set to become the CEO now, the
yeah,
youngest CEO in that industry,
yeah,
and successful at that, obviously growing your business. That part is so important, I feel like, because in eye care, I'm sure it's across the board in other industries too, but in eye care, you could see that there's a lot of people they're coming out of school with debt. So we can't argue the fact that they need to make money. Everybody needs that. You got to pay off bills. You got to have be able to live. Um, but there's kind of this movement towards like, let me just go make the most money wherever that is, regardless of the experience that I'm going to get, regardless of whether it's going to help me build my skill set. I'm wondering if you can kind of like hammer down a little bit on that and why that's so
for
important
sure.
and what you might say to somebody if you're talking to them, someone like that.
Yeah, I think the thing for me, and I had this epiphany in my late 20s. I wish I would have had it even sooner than that. But, in my early 20s, I just thought, oh man, I'm this kid from Ohio that, moved to San Francisco where the cost of living is really big. I got to make as much money as possible and, start my life. And, this is the only way to be rich is to be aggressive or whatever it is. And starting my late 20s, I kind of had this like light bulb go off that it wasn't about uh, it wasn't about short-term money, because money in your career isn't linear. It's like exponential.
Hmm.
It starts kind of slow, and then over time it jumps and it goes like this. And the thing that it's correlated to, that I realized, was your skill set. It's not correlated to necessarily your title or your job. And sure, maybe you could bump it up the ladder a little bit by jumping a job here or jumping a job there. But ultimately, what happens is somebody says that person's skill set is something I cannot live without. And as a result, I'm going to pay them for it. And I'm going to pay them a lot for it, because they're the best at whatever that thing is that they do. And so I've really spent, the last, call it 14 years of my life, 15 years of my life, focusing on my skill set and thinking, I'm going to be the best executive in the gaming space that I can be. And eventually somebody will reward me for that and give me an opportunity to prove that, my skill set matches what I think it does. And that's
Right.
what happened to me over time. But I think if I would have just been focused on, well, is my title big enough to get the next role? Like, people didn't give me the CEO job because of my previous title. They gave it to me because of the results of my last job, And so I think it's really about focusing on your skill set, the scope of your responsibility, and ultimately the results that you produce there.
Yeah, I think that's great, and it's nice to know that that's worked out for you in your scenario there.
Yeah.
Seems to be working pretty well. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping
So far, so good.
others, who are listening, who are maybe trying to, because to be honest with you, I have been there myself, right? And I'm sure many of us have. We come out of school and maybe we start making money, and that those dollar signs look really attractive, and you feel like that's the only thing that matters. But as you start going through it, you start to realize that building your skill set, doing something that's actually fulfilling, building a career that that fulfills, that's satisfying, that you look forward to going to work, and you're making a difference. Those things start to matter more, and the money tends to kind of follow once you got those other things in place, because you love what you do. You're going to put more into it. You're going to be passionate about it versus just checking in and out. You got to do that for 20, 30, 40 years of your life. You don't want to just be clocking in and out every
For
day,
sure.
because you're not going to put everything into it at that point. You're just looking forward to leaving.
Yeah,
um, you
I
know,
agree.
and for me, like, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is trying to make sure our profession, our industry continues to grow in the long term. So if we keep having more and more people coming into the industry who are just clocking in and out, that they're not going to put that extra effort in to grow the industry, that's going to, that's going to be a negative. That's going to have a negative effect on our profession in the long term.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about uh, being the youngest. I know I've mentioned that a couple of times already here. Being the youngest CEO in that slot machine industry, in the slot machine business, you're probably dealing with some big companies, I imagine some pretty aggressive CEOs and other business
For sure.
people. How has being the youngest, how how has it been a positive, or has it been a negative for you in this space?
I think it's interesting. It's not a testament probably to my skill set and ability to get somewhere fast, because I'm not that young. I'm in my 40. I'm early 40s, 41, and I think our industry is a bit behind the curve on other industries in terms of having younger leaders promoted and into the bigger positions. I spent some time at my old private equity firm in Alpine about a year ago, and I was walking through their offices, and I felt like a dinosaur. I felt like the oldest, guy there. It was like all these really young people in these, brightly lit offices and corners, and I'm sure they were doing pretty well. And
Yeah.
so I think our industry is evolving, and I think the place that it really helps me is that there's a lot of young talent in our business that want to work in a different place. I mean, the generations are shifting, right? Like, what maybe a 60-year-old CEO expects out of his employees is different than what a 40-year-old CEO expects out of their employees, and good or bad, but it's just different, right? And so I think I've been able to attract people that want that newer sort of one of our core values, talking about core values later, is called the new school. And so Bluberi is very new school. Everything we do a new school sort of approach at it. And I've been able to bring that to it. And certainly I'm in these meetings where, I'm the youngest person, but I don't really let that phase me, because again, it's back to that thing we talked about earlier. Like, I'm very confident in my skill set and my ability in the business. I'm pretty sure there's a problem that you can't task me with in this space that I don't have some thoughts on. And so I stand tall in those meetings on those types of things. But I've also found a lot of really great mentors in the space that have been and done and seen things that I haven't seen yet. And I think the older you get, the more you appreciate that, that experience and say, geez, I really like to learn some of these, sort of stories from some of these folks that went before me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Tell me about that, how important mentors have been and how maybe you've gone about finding mentors for yourself.
Yeah, I've never been shy about reaching out to people and saying, "Hey, I'd love to have coffee with you. I'd love to, pick your brain on this thing." And I think I've done that my entire career, even when I was, in my early 20s. And I think you'll be surprised about who will respond to you and who would,
Yeah.
take your meeting or take your lunch. And I think, go into those meetings with questions. And I've done that, for a really long time. I've been lucky to have a lot of great folks in the gaming business that have, come a long way in in the space and have, seen a lot of great things and have helped me along my journey. And then I have some folks from outside the business, like my old private equity firm. When I really have a problem I'm tasked with, I can call them and say, "Hey, here's this thing I'm working on." And then I would say I have an amazing peer network. So I have another CEO in the space who's in gaming, who's roughly my age. He's a little bit older than me, but
Yeah.
he and I talk pretty frequently about challenges in the business or challenges that we're facing. And I have some other friends that are CEOs of other businesses, and we talk, pretty regularly about, hey, this, that, problem, totally unrelated to our business, but they're all kind of the same, challenges and things we're facing.
That's awesome. So do you so first of all, I'm going to say I agree that you'll be surprised how many people would actually take you up on stuff like that.
Yeah,
Definitely from my own experience, I've noticed that too. Just having the initiative to reach out to someone often goes a long way. I know from the other side of it, if somebody reaches out to me, for example, in fact, this morning I was speaking with a student who's a pre-optometry student, and when somebody like that reaches out, I personally acknowledge the fact that they took the initiative to reach out and to ask
absolutely.
questions or to ask to come in and shadow or whatever it might be. I think that's always nice. So I'm always willing to give my time in that scenario. So and I've seen that's definitely been the case with others as well. Um, are you approaching that with anything specific that you might say? Let's say you're going to somebody who's got a few years experience on you, 10 years, 15 years ahead of you. Are you approaching them with any specific, like, I think the thing I'm getting at here is like humility or anything else that you're like looking or you're approaching that conversation to
Yeah,
ask them
almost
to speak
always.
with you?
I'm a lifelong learner. Like, I always think you can learn something from every conversation that you have and every interaction that you have. So I generally have a pretty like specific thing I want to talk to people about. Hey, I would like to talk to you about this
Uh-huh.
phase that my business is in right now. I know that you did this at this place, and I have some questions for you about what you achieved here. And I'm always trying to think about, you know, what things could I be doing differently at the business that maybe somebody else has already tackled, and trying to get their experience. So I think it's really important to have a specific idea of what you want,
Hmm.
sort of out of those conversations, and you'll be shocked by what you'll get. You'll get really great answers, and you get people that say, "Hey, I don't know, it was 15 years ago. I haven't been running this, business. You're in it. You have a better handle than I do." But
Yeah.
that gives you the confidence too. Like, oh, okay, like this person's not, critical of what I'm doing. They're saying you're doing all the things I can see. You're doing great. Like, it seems like I think you get some of those interactions, and they're really helpful for a number of reasons, right? They give you, sort of the confidence that you're on the right track,
Yeah.
or they give you something really, really to think about, something critical. So
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice to actually go into that with very specific, like, I'd like to chat with you about this specific thing versus like, I'd
yeah,
like to pick your brain about stuff.
right.
I think that maybe puts people off a little bit because then that might end up being a 2 hour conversation that's not really that fruitful.
Yeah. All these people are
Versus
busy, even if they're retired and they've made a lot of money, they got plenty of stuff they want to
sure,
do, and so you say, "Hey, look, I have this specific thing, like let's talk about it." I think you get a really good response.
that's great. So you started as CEO of this relatively, I mean, in gaming, a small company.
Yeah, very
Um,
small.
in the beginning of 2020,
Yeah.
just a few months before the world shut down.
Yeah.
And slot machines is, from what I remember, require people to be there physically in person
Yes.
to be used. So like, what did that look like, man? That's just crazy. Like, first of all, stepping in to a company like that, but then having everything shut down. Like, what did that look like to you?
It was just terror,
Yeah.
like sheer terror. I mean, you know, I came in and the company was already a turnaround, so we were already, financially trying to make things work with a limited budget. Um, and I think my initial reaction to COVID, and I remember like I was flying up, I was in Toronto to see our investors on like a Monday, and then I went over to Quebec to see our offices on, kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, and by like Friday, everything was shut down. Like I'd just flown home, and there was like nobody at the airport, and I kind of just thought, oh man, what are we gonna do? Maybe this thing's not gonna make it. Maybe we're gonna go under. And after you get over the terror of that, you start talking to some folks. And I called my old my boss at my previous job, the CEO there, the guy named David Lopez, who's about 10 years older than me, and he said to me, he said, look, the best thing about this is nobody has a playbook. So whatever you do,
That's true.
it's going to be okay. There is no right answer or wrong
Right.
answer here. And that gave me a lot of confidence to go, okay, yeah, he's right. Like there's not a playbook here. And we just dug in, and really it became a blessing in some ways to our business because we needed to reset things pretty hard. And I'm not sure we would have gone as quickly to make some of the decisions that we made without the sort of terror of COVID, if you will, hanging
Right.
over us. And so we made some really hard decisions really quickly, in terms of like right sizing our workforce and moving functions from the business. When I started, most of the business was in Quebec. And what I wanted to be in Quebec was our game development and talent around technology, because there's a really rich technical talent pool in Quebec, and particularly with companies like Ubisoft being based in Montreal. And so we moved kind of all the manufacturing and sales and HR and finance and accounting and everything to Las Vegas during the pandemic, to kind of reset expectations. And then we started attracting talent, which was a easier time to do it because people were furloughed from companies and they were
Mm,
feeling disenfranchised. So
right.
we were able to find some talent to come join us during that time because they didn't like whatever way was COVID was being handled at their company, which was,
Right. Right.
sort of a lot of people felt that way.
Yeah.
Um, and then I will tell you that I would say that the Canadian government, and that this is not me just, pandering to Canada here, but the Canadian government handled the pandemic, I thought, in a financial way better than actually the US did. So the programs they had around keeping employees employed
Right.
really helped our company keep going.
I see.
And that was a huge benefit. And it really woke me up to like the benefits of having a company that's multinational and working across, sort of borders. But, we came out of the pandemic, and every casino was shut down for about 2.5 months. And that was also just terror.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Crazy.
there is no revenue coming into the business. And but we were able to kind of right size the business, get it focused. We kept investing in R&D, developing new games, during the shutdown, and we came out of the other side of that much stronger and leaner company. Once we got our bearings, but we were just I was trying to be mindful of, and I've learned a lot, being in this role, but like, I think executives and CEOs sometimes lie to employees unintentionally. And you don't know that you're lying when you say the thing you say,
Mm,
but later on you realize that, oh, they could think I was lying about this thing because I said this, and then we couldn't do that. We couldn't live up to it. So those type of interactions made me much more thoughtful about the way I communicate with the company, made me much more thoughtful about how I work through very stressful problems, and really try to give as much clarity to our employees as we're working through those things. So I learned a lot of lessons that I don't think you could learn any other way other than having gone through that. And so
yeah.
I'm thankful that we, went through that, and that, it was a great learning opportunity for anybody running a company at the time. Nobody wants to have to go through a horrific thing like COVID, but I always I'm maybe an optimist by nature. So I always try to find the sort of bright spots.
That's amazing that you did that, man. That's
Yeah.
really, really incredible. You already came into a company that was financially struggling, and then everything shut down, but you use that as an opportunity to turn it around, to make those hard decisions. I think that's a really great point, because if COVID hadn't happened, some of those decisions might have been sort of pushed down the road, kick the
I
can
think
down the
so.
road. Let's just wait till this is time is right or whatever.
Yeah, they weren't dire. It's like,
Yeah,
this is not killing us right now, but man, we were better off for having just said, okay, we're going to do this sort of
that's
hard
great.
and fast. Yeah.
So when you let's look at it from a so one of the biggest knocks on optometrists from within not from outside, but from within, is when we come out of optometry schools, we're not trained in business. Like, we want to be business. Many of us want to be business people. We want to own our own practice. We want to run this, run that, but we get very little training in it. So let's say from that lens, we have some optometrists, maybe, other people in the eye care industry listening here who are business owners, and want to strengthen that business acumen a little bit. You coming into a business that was financially not doing as well, not as healthy as it should be, what's the first thing you look at? And what are some of the first decisions you make? Let's say, regardless of
Yep.
COVID, when you first walked in the door in January, what did it look like?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing I always do, and I have a background in finance, but I ask for financials and the state of the financials. Forget about what they say, forget about what the revenue number is or the profit number is, just like the state, like how hard are they to produce or how like difficult are they to get, tells me a lot about
The
how the business
financials
is.
themselves,
Yeah,
the numbers on the
like
paper, how quickly can you produce them for me?
yeah, like if I said, "Hey, Harbier, I want to see the financials of your practice," and
Yeah.
it took you like 2 weeks to get them to me, I would be like, "Oh, okay, like that's not great. Something's going on,
Yeah,
right?"
yeah.
And when I got to Blueberry, it was a little bit like that. I would ask a question, and people would go away for like 3 days and come back and go, "Well, we think it's this," and I was like, "Okay, well, let's let's get to a place where we can get that answer a lot faster, a lot quicker." Because what you realize is maybe people aren't looking at things the same way I would look at them, and so it takes a little time to get reporting. But just the ability to pull a report and to get it in an organized fashion quickly is step one. And if you struggle with that, you're not alone. But there are a lot of companies out there that can help you with that. There's lots of like consulting firms and folks that can help you get that data pulled together quickly. And I think it starts with really like having a smooth reporting process where you're consistently getting information. You know, I like to get information every week. I would settle for monthly if I couldn't get monthly, but you have sort of a key set of things you're looking at, plus the financial data underlying the business. If I was an optometrist, maybe it would be like how many visits or appointments did I have this week, and what was the average bill for each one of those folks, right? Like you would find the key things that
Mm,
you would want to look at on a regular basis and make sure in real time you could see them, because that would help you make changes to the business. If you're seeing things, oh, I got my data this week, but it was for 2 months ago, it's sort of hard to change anything,
right.
And so, but I think I find, and I've worked with a ton of founder owned businesses in my career back from my time at Alpine, but I do find that a lot of times the data and information isn't the priority of the founder of the company, because they either, in your case, like in optometry, like you're actually a technician, like you're like
Yeah.
a specialist, like doing a thing, right? So you have a full-time job doing that, and
Yes.
then maybe another full-time job running a business, right? And so generally they're either like pretty heavily weighted on one side or the other of those two things. And or they are just brilliant inventors of some sort, like they've invented this thing and this thing is a magic cure, and that's the thing they're obsessed about, but they don't
Right.
really care about the details of sort of all of that. And so I've
Yeah.
had a lot of success in my career just going in and helping those people get focused on, well, who's in charge of the data? How do we get that in the right place? And I think for people that are curious about business, like you should take some business courses. Harvard actually offers a class. I think it's called HBX. It's on through Harvard Business School, but it's a pretty like intensive, short financial training program that I send a lot of times like young sales executives that want to learn more about sort of business through. But things like that I think are great resources that you can find to really increase your business acumen.
That's a great idea. So, I
And it's
first
a
of all, I
lot
appreciate
easier,
that.
by the way, to learn the business acumen than it is to learn how to be an optometrist.
Sorry, say that again?
I think it's a lot easier to
Oh,
learn the business side than it is to learn how to be an optometrist. I
well,
mean,
you know what? I think optometrists might beg to differ on that one.
yeah,
We as an optometrist, we go to school to learn science stuff, right? And so we
yeah,
do like 4 years of undergrad and then 4 years of optometry, all in science stuff. So
yeah,
that kind of comes a bit more naturally to most of us. And once you start looking at numbers, for me, for sure, my eyes start to gloss over a little bit.
yeah,
Definitely, I've been trying to put more effort into it over the last, however many years. But Probably taking a course like what you're suggesting there, that HBX or whatever that course is called at
Yeah.
Harvard Business is a good idea. I have some friends who've done that. In fact, I have a couple of friends who've done MBAs, gone out and
Yeah.
just done the whole thing, which is insane to do that.
Hmm.
Uh, you
It's
know,
a lot of effort.
that's a lot of work, but I imagine that they're going to do very well for themselves once they kind of
I
get
would
it all
say,
working.
as I've gotten older in my life, I spend a lot less time being insecure or worried about the things I'm not good at. And I focus a lot on the things I am really good at. And then
Okay.
the way I solve the things I'm not good at is I just find the right people to do those things. And I think that would be really the best advice I could give anybody in your business is like, no matter how hard you try, if you're just never going to be as passionate about the numbers, find somebody who is.
Right.
Find somebody that you could partner with that will take that off of your plate and make that easy for you. And don't have a ton of um, anxiety or self doubt about your inability to do that thing, because ultimately you're great at this other thing, and that's the thing that makes all the money anyway. So,
Yeah.
focus on that thing.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. So one of the things when we chatted in Vegas, that really the big part of that conversation was talking about your core values that you developed when you went to Blueberry, came to Blueberry, and how important that's been now in growing the business. I would love to at least very kind of quickly go through all of those now and just
Sure.
share why they're important to you. I'd love to show a graphic, maybe. Maybe if you send me something, I'll be able to put it up somewhere,
Yeah, for sure. I can send it to you.
either in the middle of the podcast here, or I'll share it on social media or something like that, so people can
Yeah.
look at it. But I was really really impressed by the core values, and I actually think I took a couple of those and started to, maybe not officially but unofficially, start to implement them in our practices as well. So
Yeah.
why don't we just jump right in, man? Why don't you go ahead and share those? And
Absolutely. Yeah, I think first and foremost about core values, a lot of times companies just say we need core values, and then like put together a list of like 8 words like
yeah,
integrity, pride, whatever, hard work. And I think it's really deeper than that. Like to me, core values are like, how do you want people to show up at your company every day? How do you want to show up, and how do you want everybody else at your company to show up? And how do you want customers to perceive you? And so, in conjunction with the company and myself and our executive team, we spent probably 100 hours,
wow,
going through and understanding what would be core values for us and what would be good core values for us. And we ultimately developed a set of them. And I'll walk you through some of them. But they are things that we're constantly. If you come to our company and you went for a job interview, my goal would be that you'll hear those come up naturally in the conversation. And I see it happen a lot when I'm in. People will say, oh, that's a new school moment, or this is a new school way to do this. You hear them
right,
using, they've actually changed their language to incorporate them, which I think is a sign of,
very cool.
you're doing it successfully. The other thing
Yeah,
before I expound on them is we didn't do it the first day I was there. It took a full 2 years before we implemented them, because when I first got there, I didn't know what Blueberry was. There was so much change, and like the core values have to be organic, and they have to be a part of, like, you kind of built them. They can't just be words on a piece of paper that you wrote. They have to be authentic. So, just kind of maybe walking through our core values. So the first is the new school. So we are the new school is the number one core value at Blueberry. It's probably our primary one. And so we always are trying to think through ways like, is there a new school way to do this? Whatever that is, a job interview, your first day, being onboarded at the company, the way we interact with customers. And that's really permeated throughout our business in a pretty meaningful way. And I think most competitors would describe us as different, than kind of everybody else.
mm,
The next one is find it, fix it, own it, which is our sense of ownership. So, if you find a problem in the business, it's not enough to just find it. You got to, then go get it and then fix it and bring it through an outcome. And when people bring up problems, they'll say, oh, this thing's, broken. Somebody will say, that sounds like a find it, fix it, own
mm,
it,
yeah,
mentality. Like, really, why don't you see that all the way through?
yeah, yeah,
Um, the next one is clarity and transparency. And I think those are very important to me to make sure that our company always knows. When I started at Blueberry, one of the most shocking things to me was how disconnected the average employee was from the current situation of the business. I think most of them thought the business was doing really, really well, because
Oh.
the previous executive team had said, "Oh, we've got this going, great thing going, and this great thing
Mhm.
going." And I came in and was like, "Hey, that's not what's going on. We're in trouble." And people were generally shocked by that. And I thought, nobody should ever feel that way. They should always know like sort of where they stand. And so we're always trying to be as transparent as we possibly can. Now, there's some things you can't be transparent about. If somebody came to me and said, "Hey, I'd like Harbier's social security number," like obviously I can't give you that,
Fair enough.
right? But as transparent as we can be, we're trying to be. And then clarity is a big one. Like I think a lot of times people are held accountable to standards they don't understand. And
Hmm.
so making sure we're always clarifying with people their goals and, like what are we trying to achieve with this thing, I think is really important. And that causes you to have to over communicate, but it's really, really, really important. And then, there's some others, but probably the last one I'll talk about is just um, celebrate wins, but never be satisfied. And this was an interesting one because this was also it got into kind of our language barrier that sometimes we had with Quebec and the U.S., where somebody was like, "Does that mean that you are never satisfied with us? Like the executive team is never satisfied with us?" And I was like, "No." I was like, the example we use is like it's like an Olympian that wants to beat their own records. Like you might set the world record in this whatever this thing is, but next time you're out there, you want to beat that record. And that's what we
Right.
meant by never satisfied is like we got to enjoy the success when it's happening, but we always want to push for more. We always want that ability to go, sure, people thought of us as the best this year, but we can do even better next year. And so we're always trying to push that at the company. And I tell a lot of people that, I want Bluberi to be the best job they've ever had, but also maybe the hardest job that they've ever had.
Mm,
Like
mm.
if we're doing it right, it should stretch all of your skills. And it doesn't have to be this like pressure cooker where everything's miserable to do that. You can have peak performance and not feel like, oh, you're going to die in the process of it, or you're going to get fired every day, or any kind of things like that. Like I really want people to feel like they can do their best work safely at Bluberi.
That's amazing. Yeah. I think to that very last thing, a good job or the best job would be one that does stretch you, that makes you grow
Yeah,
and, push your comfort zone a little bit, whatever it might be. Because again, going back to what I was saying earlier, like if you want fulfillment and satisfaction out of your work, you're not going to get it if you're going and you're bored at work or you're just
I
doing the
totally
same
agree.
mundane thing every day. That's not going to be the best job. You want to get compensated for it. You want to make sure that you're rewarded and recognized and all of that. But you got to actually make sure it's like fulfilling work. So
Yeah.
let's go through those again. New school,
Yep.
find it, fix it, own it.
Yep.
Transparency, clarity, celebrating the wins but never satisfied and not becoming complacent. I think those are
That's right.
all really, really good um, values to have. The clarity, transparency thing. Actually, one of the optometrists that I really look up to. One of the things he was sharing, he's got a really big, busy, successful practice, and it's one of the things he shares about having those clear goals and like metrics that he's kind of holding everyone accountable to, and then he's super transparent with all his numbers. He's like, here's my P&L, go ahead and have a look to see where we spent all our money.
Absolutely.
So he says that's worked really well. When you got a big office, he's got, I don't know, 8 or 10 doctors and 40 or 50 staff. You got to start to implement something like that. Otherwise, I think that helps to build the culture, taking a step from value to culture. I think that helps develop a good culture too, because everyone knows that they're being held accountable. Nobody's dragging their feet or riding somebody else's coattails. So that's really
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people support what they help build, and if they know what they're building and they know what the results are, they're more likely to buy in to
Yeah,
whatever that is.
yeah, absolutely. So let's get closer to wrapping up. There's one question I want to ask you that was sort of on our list of questions, and then there's
Mhm.
two questions that I ask every guest that comes on the podcast.
Sure.
Um, last thing I kind of want to ask you here is what advice you might give to aspiring business people, entrepreneurs out there who are trying to get into more of a role that you're in here, running a business.
I think the two things I would say is one, we kind of touched on it earlier, but I would focus on your skill set. Do a honest self assessment of yourself. Like, what are the things that you're really not good at, and what are the things you're really good at, and then figure out ways to take the things you're not good at and just make them a little bit better. They don't have to be the things you're the best at, but then really double down on things you're great at. I think would be my first advice. One of the exercises I do for myself, I try to think, hey, if a new CEO started tomorrow morning, what are the 5 things that he would say I'm really doing a terrible job at? And there's always 5. There's 10, there's 20, there's 30, right? Anybody could come into my job and
There's at
go, well,
least 5.
I can't believe this guy was doing that. I think that's a really good exercise for anybody in their career to go, if somebody else new took over my job, what are the things they wouldn't like? Like write down 5 things, and that'll keep you sharp. And then I think patience, and have the long game. Like you got to be ready for the moment when you get it. You're going to catch a lucky break, but I've seen a lot of people get really big responsibilities too early and not be ready for them. And they never really were able to recover, from like those mishaps that happened at, in their early 20s or late 20s or something, because they thought they were ready for something and they weren't. So just make sure you're ready. But, when you're ready, be confident in your ability and really maximize that.
Yeah, that's great. Before we go into the last couple of questions, how could people learn more about Bluberi or connect with you if you're open to that? What's the best way to get
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a pretty active profile. Reach out anytime. And then bluberi.com is our website. Let's see, I got some branding here, spelled BLUBERI. But you can check us out there and follow us. And we have a pretty aggressive social presence as well. So
that's great. Great. Yeah. Thank you. All right. So Andrew, 2 questions that I ask everybody. Number 1, if we could step in a time machine and go back to a point in your life that you were struggling, what advice would you give to yourself, younger Andrew, at that time? If you're open to it, you can share what that experience was, but more importantly, what's the advice you would give to yourself at that time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember exactly when it was. It was right when I first moved to Las Vegas in 2011 or 12. I didn't like what was going on in my career at the time. I felt like, man, maybe I made a mistake leaving the private equity firm to come here. Like I didn't see that the business was going to be successful. And I think I got pretty complacent for about a year. I think if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would say, stop feeling sorry for yourself, and double down on, your hard work and your work ethic. Because I really spent like a year just kind of coasting and going, gee, what do I want to do, with my life, feeling sorry for myself. And I think I wish I could go back and say, you have so much time ahead of you. You are so young, like get it together and get focused. And so I eventually did that. It took time, to get out of that. But I just think people in their late 20s think they're really old. People in their early 30s think they're really old. And I try to tell myself that, like, I'm not old. Like, I got a lot of time right now. And like, you got a ton of time. Like, make the most of it,
That's great advice. And actually, if I could, people are saying this now, but this is a cool thing to say. And if I could double click on that.
I love that. Yeah, I do. I love that. Yeah.
I've been waiting to use that in my own podcast. Okay, I'm going to double click on that, Andrew. The thing about so we're the same age, you and I, 41.
Yeah.
And you're right. So you hit 30. I hear this all the time because we have staff who are, in their 20s and 30s. We have doctors, young doctors who work for us who are just turning 30, and they're like, oh man, I'm old. I'm big 3-0. I was like, I talked to them. I'm like, wow, you're so young. You have no idea. Do not take your foot off the gas at all. That little bit extra that you keep your foot on the gas right now is going to compound. The compound interest is not just a financial thing. It's in life too, right?
That's right.
Everything you do right now is going to compound. And I did that too, kind of in my mid 30s. I kind of got a little lazy with working out and all of this kind of stuff. Late 20s, early 30s, I was really good shape. And then I kind of started to get lazy, and it's harder to get back to that good shape or that good place wherever you are mentally, physically. So stay on it. And I'm trying to remind myself that now that I'm 41, like I'm a father of 3. I could just be like, I'm a dad. I'll have a dad bod.
Yeah, for sure. I tell people that all the time. Like I say it to myself now too, like, the best advice you could get, and I think it applies at any age, is tell yourself this: you are the least busy you're going to be in your life right now.
Yeah.
Today. And to 20-year-olds, that's really, really true. But even for us, like, we both have girls. Our girls are getting older. They're only getting into more things. They're only going to more after-school events and weekend stuffs and performances. Like, our lives are only getting more complex, not less complex. And if you can just set your mind around that, like, all right, today is the least busy I'm going to be in my life.
Yep.
and sort of set your intention on that, I think you can really unlock, some really powerful thinking in your brain.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the other flip the whole, like, when people think they're old, like, this is the youngest you will be,
Ever be today.
ever be again, right? Today's the
Today's the day.
youngest you'll ever be again.
Yeah,
Because obviously we're only getting older. So that's
yeah,
another way to flip that script a little bit and be like, shoot, you know what? I'm only gonna get older. I better
for sure.
get things in
Yeah.
gear. Great. So thanks for that insight there. The last question I like to ask every guest is, and I think you kind of touched on it just a little bit a few minutes ago, but the question is, everything you've accomplished to this point in your life, how much of it is due to luck and how much is due to hard work?
I think I certainly had some luck. I think I spent a lot of time trying to think about what was lucky and what is skill based in my life, and it's particularly relevant in the slot machine world, where luck is and chance is a big thing.
Yeah,
But
no
I
kidding.
think that people take too much credit for things that are luck in their lives. When I was young, I really believed in this idea of like the self-made man. Like when I was a kid in Ohio growing up, I was like, "Oh, you can make it, you can do it." But like that's not really what happens. What happens is somebody gave you a chance, somebody gave you an opportunity,
Right.
because of where you were in your life or your the way you grew up or whatever it was. Like you had some sort of advantage and somebody gave you something. And then the question is, what did you do with that thing that they gave you? Did
Hmm.
you screw it up or did you make it work? And I've tried to be very mindful of that, and particularly as I've gotten older, about like you're going to catch lucky breaks. You should recognize that they are lucky breaks, but
Mm,
then you should maximize them. you know
yeah.
and I've definitely had plenty of lucky breaks. Like I think, just to name a few, like getting a job at a private equity firm out of school. I went to a state school. Like that is not something that's normal and happens. Just like the owner of the company had a connection to my school. Like that was
Oh,
just
wow.
luck. Our company at AGS was bought by one of the largest private equity firms in the world, this company Apollo, who invested a ton of money in the business and gave me a lot of opportunity. Like it was a weird deal for them to do. Like that could have gone a very different direction. Like I just think there's so many of those things that could have gone left or right.
Yeah.
I joke with people at work and I say my biggest skill is luck. Like that's usually like my thing. I tell them, I'm like,
That's
the thing
awesome.
I'm the best at is being lucky. And I really believe that. Like it's just
That's
you're gonna get
incredible.
lucky. Take
The
advantage of it.
I didn't think about the irony of asking you that question, the CEO
Yeah,
of a company that builds slot machines.
absolutely. Luck.
Like, how important is luck in your life? Well, actually,
That's my
it's
whole
pretty
life.
much your daily. Yeah, that's amazing. But it's nice to hear that from your perspective, that you think that obviously hard work has to play. Like you
For
said,
sure.
you double down on your skill set. If you didn't have that skill set, then the luck is kind of irrelevant, right? You're not going to be
Yeah.
able to move forward in that profession, in that industry. But I think you're right. I think sometimes we overlook the fact um, that there were opportunities that presented themselves that were just the universe,
It's
like here.
it's okay to be lucky too, like that's not a terrible like I
Right.
think
I think
sometimes
that's the other
people.
thing. There's a negative
Yeah,
connotation on luck.
yeah, right. And I think sometimes people are like they want to make sure that everybody knows that they did this thing. And it's like, hey, like you did some part of it, but like you also got really lucky, right? And
Yeah.
the luck thing's okay, you know.
Yeah. That's totally okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Thank you, Andrew. Any last words you want to share before we wrap up here?
Nah, man, I've really enjoyed getting to know you and spending time with you. Like I really appreciate it. It's good, when I got the call originally to go speak at the Vision Council, I was like, oh, I'd love to do it, but I don't know enough about it, right? And so I think it's awesome to get different perspective and hear, different things that people in your industry are working on. So I really appreciate the chance to come on here and talk to you about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know you're busy and you got lots going on, so the fact that you took the time out to come and share your insight is amazing. Thank you so much, man. And yeah, really, feelings mutual. It was really cool to be able to meet you in person, and the energy was great there at that meeting. But again, thank you for taking the time to do this. So everybody who's listening and watching, please make sure you check out Blueberry. Learn a little bit about what happens behind the scenes when you go to a casino, right?
That's right.
Bluberi, Blueberry, and Andrew Burke is the CEO there. Feel free to reach out to him on LinkedIn. So thank you, Andrew. Thanks again for taking the time, man. I appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's listening and watching to the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. I will see you guys in the next episode.